So this is going to be a very calm video because it's an update to another calm video of mine. Some thoughts on whether MAGA is a fascist movement. And in that video, I argued that MAGA, rather than being fascist in any classical sense, is a para-fascistic movement. And the reason I argued this is because I define fascism as reactionary and authoritarian modernism posing as anti-modernism, and MAGA as reactionary authoritarian postmodernism posing as anti-postmodernism. Now in that video, I already argued, I think very well, that MAGA is postmodernist despite its pretensions to the contrary, so I feel no need to retread that ground. I already argued some, although I didn't directly make the connection, that MAGA is authoritarian, but I'm going to further that argument in this video and make the connection more explicit to what I already argued. But the biggest thing that I need to do is argue that they are reactionary. That's the biggest thing that I left out in my last video. So what does reactionary mean? Well, in modern political usage, reactionary is often, more than anything else, a scare word. It's an insult word that's used to insult a right-winger when you don't quite want to call him a Nazi. Maybe you've hit your Nazi quota for the day, right? You've hit your Godwin's Law limit for the day, so you throw in a reactionary. That's not how I'm using the word. When I say reactionary, what I mean is an unconservative, far-right ideology. So what do I mean by unconservative and far-right? To most Americans, this is nonsense. It's gibberish. That's because the American political spectrum, our Overton window, has, for as long as almost anyone who is alive today can remember, been very, very narrow. It has run from welfare liberals on the furthest left of it to American conservatives on the furthest right of it. And because of this, American political terminology has become very stunted. We use liberal to simply be a synonym for left-wing, and conservative to simply be a synonym for right-wing. And I fuck up and use the terms in this way sometimes, not so much liberal for left-wing, but I fuck up and use conservative as a synonym for right-wing sometimes myself. But in the modern era, in the times we are living in now, this is no longer a sufficient way to talk about American politics, because there are ideas outside of liberalism and outside of conservatism that are now part of mainstream political discourse in this country. And so we need to update our political terminology to reflect that. So what do I mean by unconservative? Well, opposite of conservative, so what is conservative? Now, conservative is fundamentally concerned with stability. It's in the name, right? Conserve. They want to conserve a society. So if a conservative is in a stable society, they seek to maintain it as it is, and maybe they might allow some change here and there, but they want that change to happen very slowly, very carefully. They want to make sure that no load-bearing walls get knocked down in the renovation. Now, if a conservative is in an unstable society, they seek to return to the last stable state that society was in and proceed from there. Now, some people might say that America today is unstable, and I think we are now heading in that direction. But we have been a very stable society. That might seem a crazy claim to people who grew up in the post-Cold War, end of history era of the United States. But if you have any kind of historical or global perspective that you apply when looking at America, we're a very stable country. What we call the worst riots we've seen, the 2020 riots, are just a protest in France, right? Like, we are in a remarkably stable country. And as I've talked about before on this channel, you don't get to become and remain the strongest and wealthiest nation on earth without being a stable country, without things being run pretty well. So a truly conservative mentality applied to America today would not be seeking to tear down all the walls to do the renovation. it would be seeking to fix the things that are wrong, but maintain the overall social order. And that is not MAGA. MAGA is very openly wants to kick in the walls, and if some load-bearing walls get knocked down, so be it. You can call this reckless behavior, you can call it bold action. That depends on what you think of what they're doing. But nobody can claim that they are taking a cautious approach. The most obvious example of this is the behavior of Doge, which I've talked about in another video, another couple videos of mine. I think I've talked about Doge. But it's true just across the board of their whole governing philosophy, and they don't hide it. This isn't some hidden truth that I'm dropping on you. MAGA very openly wants to tear down the deep state. They want to drain the swamp, right? They want to fundamentally flip the switch and restructure the way America has been running. And you can call that reckless, you can call it bold, you can call it whatever you want depending on what you think about it, but that is what is happening. And it is not a conservative idea, okay? That is not a conservative mentality to govern with. So, okay, you might admit they're unconservative, but what about far right? I mean, as MAGA people are always saying, no, MAGA are actually moderate. And it's the Democrats who have just gone so far left, right? That MAGA only looks far right by comparison because the Democrats have gone so far left. And this is patently absurd when you just look at one thing. Democrats still organize with their leadership from 30 years ago. Going on more than 30 years ago now. Like the Bill Clinton, who personally I'm not a big fan of. I don't really like the Clintons. But I am left of like what Democrats as a whole are like, right? I am a vote, as far as like electoral politics go, I'm a vote blue no matter who type, because I view Democrats as the obviously lesser evil, but I am not representative of what Democrats are like. So I don't like the Clintons, but most Democrats do, right? And the Clintons still like the modern Democrats, and like the Democratic Party, other than a few notable exceptions, gets along very well with its leadership from 30 years ago, okay? Now, the Republicans hate every leader that they had before Donald Trump. They hate Mitt Romney, they hate John McCain, they hate George W. Bush, they hate his daddy. They claim they love Ronald Reagan. But here's the thing. Take anything Reagan, almost anything Reagan ever actually said or did, and show it to them, and they fucking hate it. They don't like Ronald Reagan. They hate him too. But they think they like him because they have, when they think of Reagan, they don't think the actual historical figure who had beliefs and took actions. They think the Republican Messiah in their head who will bless everything that they do. That's what they think Ronald Reagan is. But when you show them his actual words, his actual actions, they don't like him. And this isn't to glorify Reagan or to say, oh, I wish we had old Ronald Reagan back. Like, I mean, sure, I'd take him back over Trump, right? But I think the only silver lining of the fucking mess that we're in is that having to watch it all is the worst torture Reagan has experienced yet in hell. I'm not a fan of Ronald Reagan, but neither is MAGA. These people do not like Ronald Reagan. They do not like the actual man. They like the idea they have of him in their heads. So, Democrats still get along very well with their leadership from decades past. And Republicans have grown to despise every leader they had until Trump hit the scene. So which party has changed? Again, is it the one that hates everyone from more than a decade ago that used to lead their party and be their like guiding figures? Or is it the party that still gets along with their people from the immediate post-Cold War era? I think it's pretty obvious which one has changed. And so, yes, MAGA is an unconservative right-wing movement. Or far right-wing movement. So it is reactionary, at least by the definition of reactionary that I have laid out. Feel free to complain to me about whatever niche, nerdy bullshit definition you would have preferred that I use, but that's how I've defined it, and they meet that definition that I'm using. So what about authoritarian? Well, in my last video on this topic, I talked about the Führer principle and the way that it seems to be applied to the letter to Donald Trump by MAGA, right? To recap, if you didn't watch that video, this is the idea that one man so embodies the will of the people that that man doing anything he wants with unimpeded will is what democracy means. That's the truest democracy. And any way of impeding that man's will is an affront to democracy. This was the means by which the Nazi ideology managed to claim that it was democratic. And it is an idea that, now I don't think that MAGA people went out and read Hitler theory and then was like, oh, I like that, I'm going to apply it to Trump. They just happened to have arrived at the same conclusion, that this one man so embodies the American people that the courts trying to make him follow the law, Congress exerting control over the power of the purse, as the Constitution says they do. Like, anything that isn't Donald Trump making decisions, anything that impedes his decisions, is seen as an affront to the Republic, which is ass backwards. The nature of having a constitutional democratic republic is having this balance of power where one man can't just do whatever he wants with the government. But they view that single executive having all the power as what democracy is, increasingly. That's their view, which is a very authoritarian view to take. And additionally, and much more concerningly, I think, to tie it back to another video that I've made, or two videos I made on due process, the MAGA emphasis on, well, if you're doing nothing wrong, you don't need due process. If you're a citizen, you don't need to, like, taking away due process from criminals and immigrants will never hurt you if you're a law-abiding citizen. And this is just false. I saw it phrased, I talked about this idea in my other videos, and I saw it phrased very, very well online. I forget who said it, but without due process, there are no citizens. You are whatever the closest ICE agent says you are. And that is true. Without due process, there are no citizens. You are whatever the closest ICE agent says you are. And I would go further and say you are whatever the closest law enforcement of any kind says you are, without due process. If a cop comes up, if you don't have due process and a cop comes up and says, you did this murder, well, sorry buddy, you're going to prison. Doesn't matter whether you did it or not. If there's no due process for immigration matters and an ICE agent walks up and says you're an illegal, it doesn't matter if your family has lived in this country for 10 generations. You are whatever the ICE agent says you are if there's no due process on immigration matters. And there are two rights that uphold all our other rights. They are the pillars on which every other right we have is built. Due process and the Second Amendment. Okay? So, I think that not only should we be very, very jealous of our due process rights, very unwilling to let them go, I think the government should be very cautious when they remember what our alternative is. But trying to centralize all power in one man, trying to strip away the rights to due process, there is no good faith argument that MAGA is not an authoritarian movement. You might believe that what we need is authoritarianism. I wholeheartedly disagree. I believe what we need to be is a constitutional democratic republic, but maybe you think that we're well past that, right? Maybe you think authoritarianism is what we need, but that is what they're doing. You can't argue in good faith that they aren't authoritarians. If you want to defend it, you have to argue that authoritarianism is good. That's the only way around it. So yes, there's just been basically an update on my last video, because I didn't make the case at all in that last video that MAGA was reactionary. I just stated that as a given, which is not something that I like doing when I make these arguments. And I did talk about the authoritarianism a little bit, but I didn't tie it back, and I didn't tie in other important concepts related to that. So this video was a necessary extension of that first argument. And unless later I realize that I forgot some other important shit that I have to now make a third video about, that's all I have to say about that.